landscape and the global scenario, colorectal cancer incidence-wise is in the third position as per the latest Globocan data. And if we see the mortality, then it's in the second position. So if we keep aside all other causes of cancer, then colorectal cancer definitely has a very interesting and very important role in overall incidence and mortality. Now, if we look at India, then also incidence-wise it's in the fourth position. And when we look in this death rate, then definitely it's not that much common. One important finding in all these epidemiological studies was that in all these countries where colorectal cancers are one of the main cancers, it's mainly the male who are affected. The incidence and death are relatively less in women. And on pattern or on assessing or analyzing the data on metastatic cancers, the SEER data analysis showed that almost 18% population of colorectal cancer patients, they are metastatic on diagnosis. And liver was the most common site for diagnosis. And it was found that between colon and rectum, colon has a higher propensity for liver metastasis, whereas rectal cancer has a higher propensity for lung metastasis. And it was again found that the patients who had a lung metastasis, they have a higher incidence of developing bone and brain metastasis in future. So after treatment, it was found that 50 to 60% eventually develop a metastatic disease, and the main site of metastasis is liver, and 80 to 90% of liver metastasis are unresectable. A lot of important developments happened in last couple of years in terms of diagnosis, and we know there are a lot of imaging, including CT development, newly coming with these lot of molecular markers, PET scans. There has been a significant change in tissue diagnosis, the analysis of mutation, the RAS, BRAF, HER2, and then we have this NGS as a comprehensive tool to diagnose all the mutation and any targetable therapeutic mutation. So that has definitely changed the diagnostic landscape. And if we see the treatment options, there are a plethora of treatments, including systemic treatment, surgical resection, and ablative treatment. So without going into the details of all these individual treatment options, we are going to discuss today the targeted therapy, specifically the role of bevacizumab, and we are going to discuss about the role of ablative radiation, and followed by that we'll be having a rocking panel discussion. And we are really fortunate to have fantastic faculties with us. The role of bevacizumab in metastatic colorectal cancer will be taken by Dr. Deepanjan Panda, who has been working as a senior consultant medical oncologist at Indrabose Hospital, Delhi. And then the role of ablative radiation will be taken care of by Dr. Swarupa Mitra, who has been working as senior consultant and GI and generative radiation oncology. And the panel will be headed by Dr. Hal. He is a senior consultant medical oncologist at Indraprastha Hospital, Delhi. And we have very senior and eminent faculties as our panelists, Dr. Deepak Gavil, who is a senior gastrosurgeon and laparoscopic surgeon. We have Dr. V. Srinivasan, who has been head in radiation oncology department at Mayat, Chennai. And sir has also been the secretary for the academic wing of Association of Radiation Oncologists of India. We have Dr. Shoaib Jaidi, who is a senior surgical oncologist and working as a senior consultant at Indraprastha Apollo Hospitals. We have Dr. Gagan Saini, who is a senior consultant radiation oncologist at Max Vaishali and Max Patparganj. He has also been the associate director of the institute. We have Dr. Bikash Kumar, who has been working as senior consultant radiation oncologist and unit head at Asian Institute of Medical Sciences. We have dynamic young medical oncologist, Dr. Safalta Bagmar, who has been working as senior consultant at BLK Hospital. She has also worked as a faculty at prestigious ILBS Institute, Delhi. And she has also served at Narayana Hospital, Gurgaon. We have Dr. Rajit Chananab, and he has been working as a senior consultant at Dharamshila Narayana Super Specialty Hospital. And we have Dr. Akash Kumar Jha, who has been a faculty at National Cancer Institute, part of this All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi, which has been the newly formed dedicated cancer institute at Jhajjar. So we are actually expecting a rocking session, a great academic discussion followed by a fantastic panel discussion. And without taking any further time, now I want to invite Dr. Dipanjan Panda to start his presentation. Welcome on board, sir. I am stopping sharing my screen, and please start sharing your screen.
Yes, thank you, thank you very much for inviting me as a speaker. I have been asked to complete this in 10 minutes, so I will be very brief and to the point. But not all the points can be covered, but I will try to give a brief review of bevacizumab in the management of metastatic colorectal cancer. What is our perspective? So, as we all know, but let me reiterate, most of the fact is known to everybody, but I think I used to be a little dumb student in my childhood. So my teacher say, if you hammer same thing again and again, most probably you remember better. I think most of the good thing about medical is that most of us are average merit guy, and I believe, at least for myself, if you hammer things, I remember. So we now know for sure that colon cancer, like most of the cancer, is more than one disease. So we are moving from organ specific to more general disease. So if we know that anatomically, we know that most probably colorectal cancer has three parts, that right side and left side are definitely not same as far as molecular biology, genetics, and response to treatments are concerned. Rectal cancer, as Dudul very rightly pointed out, even if you look at the metastatic potential, commonest metastatic from colon is in liver. In fact, there was a paper which showed that without liver mets, the lung mets in colon cancer is less than 2%, which is not right actually for rectal cancer, especially the lower rectal cancer, which we do see, they can skip liver and go to directly lung. And we also know that the prognostic and predictive marker for relatively young versus old people are not same. And the latest is the stool microbiota. In fact, this is a big research area. Some of my ex-colleagues at ILBS are doing on actually stool transplant in hepatitis. And also in cancer, we know that with change in flora, the tumor microenvironment also changes. In molecular side, we know that microsatellite instability is a big issue. Microsatellite stable tumor not only is less responsive to chemotherapy, but they may have some role of immunotherapy is there. And HER2 positive tumors, they are responsive to trastuzumab. And now we also know that if you have a BRAF mutant tumor, most probably they are not only as a poor prognostic marker, but they also have a predictive marker. And of course, we have the old one, which is RAS mutation versus RAS wild type. Started with KRAS, but now we know that there is NRAS and HRAS, pan-RAS mutation versus wild type. We also know that if the patient has a BRAF mutation, then also even if he is RAS wild type, most probably the patient will not be responsive to RAS monoclonal antibody, the EGFR monoclonal antibody, because the BRAF is a downstream to RAS. Last 20-30 years, the treatment in colorectal cancer has increased, and we have actually a luxury of too many options, I would say. I remember when I was an DM student about 15 years back, Dr. Axel Groth once said, you have 4 or 5 drugs, you have to do some permutation combination of all those and use. So basically, you have identical 5-FU and oxaliplatin. During my student period, first came bevacizumab and followed by cetuximab with succession, and then they have been fighting for spaces, and today we will be discussing their role. We also saw coming of regorafenib, aflibercept, ramucirumab, panitumumab, and TAS-102. Some of them are available in India, some of them are not. But nowadays, their permutation and combination is now becoming mind-boggling. So to cut the clutter, to follow one of my favorite journalists, cut the clutter, we can just say that most patients with metastatic colorectal cancers likely have unresectable disease at first presentation. So upfront resectable colorectal cancer is actually, if you strictly go by the, is around 10%, and of them potentially resectable will be another 30%, but 60% will be maybe permanently unresectable. That's what actually the Indian scenario is. Now the resectable, we don't have much of a problem. We do the resection, and that is curative surgery, and followed by, depending on the stage, we give adjuvant chemotherapy. The role of biologics are not there. If it is, however, is permanent, potentially resectable, then we have a role of biologic therapy to shrink the tumor and followed by surgery, or if it is permanently unresectable, then you have a biologic therapy to increase the progression-free survival and overall survival. The goal is ultimately maximizing the overall survival while maintaining the quality of life. And EGFR and VEGFR both are growth signals pathway. The EGFR works on the tumor cells, epithelial growth factor receptors, where the VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor receptors, are mainly present in the tumor vessels. So basically, the VEGF receptor shrinks the tumor neoangiogenesis, and ultimately changes in the tumor microenvironment. Both ultimately have a downstream pathway for the RAS, that is RAS, RAF, MEK, ERK, that is mitogen activated phosphokinase pathway. The other one is PI3 kinase, AKT, and mTOR pathway. Now, if you look at the metastatic colorectal cancer treatment recommendation, the first line, very nutshell, if you have a RAS mutated tumor, use chemotherapy along with anti-VEGF monoclonal antibody. If you have a RAS wild type also, you can use anti-VEGF monoclonal antibody with chemotherapy. Especially if you have a right-sided tumor, even if you have a RAS wild type, people nowadays prefer to use anti-VEGF monoclonal antibody, this bevacizumab. For a left-sided RAS wild type tumor, however, you can still use chemotherapy with anti-GFR. And but there is one part I will not be discussing, but there are one study, at least more than one study, which shows if you want a quick shrinkage of tumor, that is your goal. Even if right side for a RAS wild type tumor, you can use anti-EGFR, but that I think is the scope of this. But there are data like ATOM study. Nonetheless, for a second line, it will depends on your first line. So for a RAS mutated tumor, you don't have much of an option. It is anti-VEGF monoclonal antibody with chemotherapy. However, if you have it is a RAS wild type tumor and you have used anti-EGFR monoclonal antibody first line, you can use anti-VEGF or vice versa. For second line or third line beyond, you can use regorafenib, and there are also other drugs like aflibercept and TAS-102. For tumors which are MSI, the microsatellite stable, microsatellite unstable tumor, you can have an option of using pembrolizumab, but I think that is beyond the scope of this today, that I'll be staying away from that. And also for HER2 positive tumor, you can use trastuzumab, but that's a very small subset. Now, what are the thing I consider before treating? The tumor characteristic, patient preference, and patient characteristics, three things. So among the tumor characteristics, the clinical presentation, biology, RAS mutation status, and BRAF mutation status, I do it on the baseline. I also discuss with patients what is the expectation regarding toxicity profile, flexibility, socioeconomic factors from where they come, 2 weekly or 3 weekly or weekly treatment, what can possible, the age, performance status, and also, of course, the prior adjuvant treatments as far as the chemotherapy is concerned, and the comorbidities. Now, if you see these last 20 years or so, so we can say we have come a long way. I was a student, the average survival with chemotherapy used to be about 20 months. Now then came the data of anti-EGFR monoclonal antibody, which came around 22, 23 months. And to that, ultimately the CALGB trial and recently the TRIBE2 data, we are looking at a median overall survival of 30 months, which I say is very significant. And we are understanding also the tumor biology better and better, so I think things will improve. Now, if we look at very quickly what are the phase 3 trials which supports the biological agents for first-line treatment, for bevacizumab, we have tried FIRE3, CALGB, AVF2107G, ARTIST, and NO16966 trial. Cetuximab, it's FIRE, Bristol, CALGB, and PRIME and ASPECTS are 2 trials for panitumumab. So the common trial for Bev and cetuximab, they are the 2 main drug biologics which are vying for the first line therapy. I'll be quickly discussing the FIRE and 3 and CALGB. Most of the data are known. I'll just be reiterating the known fact. The PEAK is another, which is bevacizumab versus panitumumab, but since they didn't test any formal hypothesis, it was a phase 2 product, I will not be discussing them. So I'll be mainly discussing FIRE3, but the primary endpoint was overall response rate in an untreated KRAS wild-type metastatic colorectal cancer, and CALGB, where the primary endpoint was overall survival, where BEV along with chemotherapy was tested. So if you look at the FIRE3 with the key outcome in the intention to treat population over overall response rate, there is actually not much difference. If you if you look at the KRAS, the PFS, if you look at the PFS, is 10 months versus 10.3 months. Now, though the PFS was similar, but they always claimed that in the cetuximab arm, the overall survival was superior, about 3 months. Now, there has been many criticism of this trial, why it was done, but I really don't have much time to go into detail. But I think the bigger trial, where when you look at the BEV versus cetuximab, is CALGB, which is by number was much bigger. It was done on a long time. So the trial initially had 3 arms, but ultimately the third arm of dual monoclonal antibody was taken off after the data came that they don't work. And if you look at the KRAS wild-type population, the overall survival in cetuximab is not different from bevacizumab's first-line cancer. It is, in fact, almost similar. And even if you look at the separate group, like the FOLFIRI treated subgroup, then also you see that numerically actually BEV is superior, whereas the p-value is similar. So you can say the OS results of CALGB 80405 and the FOLFIRI subgroup, they refute the FIRE3 overall survival. The odd feature is that the FOLFOX plus cetuximab group seems to be superior than the FOLFOX plus bevacizumab. But if we look at other data like COIN, Nordic, and UPOC, where oxaliplatin-based chemotherapy is in use, they did not support the use of cetuximab with this regimen. So this data is a little odd with other features which is there. So what we can consider from both FIRE3 and without going into the nitty-gritty and mudslinging, that most probably If you have
another 2 minutes.
Yes, most probably if you have if we consider the other subgroup analysis, there is not much difference between the FOLFOX, bevacizumab and cetuximab as far as the RAS wild type tumor is concerned. Now, if you talk about the sidedness, then regardless of tumor location, the pooled analysis of bevacizumab data, that's what bevacizumab can act both in right and left side. And we know that cetuximab does not work well on the right-sided tumor. So this is the patient who have a wild type KRAS. They are eligible for both anti-VEGF and anti-EGFR treatment, whether with a RAS mutant tumor, you are only eligible for anti-VEGF. So the key points between the VEGF inhibitions, that duration, time to progression, maintenance strategy, and treatment beyond progression. There is a clinical synergism between 5-FU and BEV, and prolonged VEGF inhibition beyond progression is also supported by positive phase 3 trial. And the most importantly, now we know that with triplet, bevacizumab shown very good result. So this is the macro study which shows CAPOX plus BEV versus BEV, the similar results. So we can see we can only use single agent bevacizumab as a maintenance therapy. Second line, I will not be delving in detail, but I would definitely like to discuss this case called TRIBE2, where they have used FOLFOXIRI plus BEV, followed by on progression, again FOLFOXIRI plus BEV versus FOLFOX plus BEV versus FOLFIRI plus BEV. And if you look at this data, that is PFS2, that is from starting to the second progression, the PFS2 is 19 months on FOLFOXIRI plus BEV, and the overall survival data, the second PFS 6.5, and overall survival data is actually 27.6 months was the last time, and this ASCO they have shown even better result. So the triplet is definitely much showing a much better response than the doublet in fit patients. Now we also know that from TML study that if you continue bevacizumab beyond progression, there is improvement in both OS and PFS. So bevacizumab has potential as a first line, as a second line, as well as beyond progression. And this ASCO 2020 data has shown that it is a pooled analysis of 5 major trials that shown that median overall survival of FOLFOXIRI plus BEV is around 29 months, but the control with doublets is 24 months. So they are significantly and meaningfully improved survival data in patients with metastatic colorectal cancer. So my take-home message is that bevacizumab, by virtue of inhibiting VEGF, is thought to cause regression of the existing tumor vasculature and prevent the development of new blood vessels, thereby inhibiting tumor growth. In RAS mutant and right-sided tumor, bevacizumab shown superior efficacy in terms of ORR, PFS, and OS in comparison to anti-EGFR monoclonal antibody. In both first and second line, RCT demonstrated improvement in OS in patients with mCRC treated with bevacizumab in combination with cyproxide chemo. And more recently, we have trials which have helped answer the question of whether bevacizumab treatment should be continued beyond disease progression. The answer is yes. And so bevacizumab remains the gold standard with an important evolving role in improving outcome in patients with metastatic colorectal cancer. Thank you. So I will...
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you for your excellent and in-depth discussion about role of bevacizumab in metastatic CRC. And may I now request Dr. Swarupa Mitra to take over the session and present the role of ablative radiation in metastatic colorectal cancer. Dr. Mitra has been working as a senior consultant radiation oncology and chief GI and genitourinary radiation oncology at Rajiv Gandhi Cancer Institute and Research Center. She has also been part of multiple central scientific research committee, and she has also been author of multiple peer-reviewed national articles in national and international journals. Over to you, ma'am, for your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Dodul. And let me appreciate once again this magnificent work you are doing. And I really wish I was born that time. You were born that time. They are doing such studies and such classes. So my topic is role of ablative radiation for metastatic colorectal cancer. Now, since there are lots of students over here, so I'm trying to go a little bit to the basics. Now, metastatic cancers, this is a fact that there is a change in outlook towards metastatic cancer. No more that nihilism is there, and there are hopes that maybe some of them are cured, and there are other questions also that there may be how many types of metastasis are there. Some are poly, some are oligo, and whether oligometastasis is a separate entity or not. So there are several questions and several terms which actually intrigue us. So there's a restaging of the stage 4 cancer these days, of all cancers, but especially the colorectal cancer. And how did this begin? This began actually in 1907 with the Halstead's theory of contiguous cancer spread. This is the seed and the soil theory. And actually, this formed the basis of our thoughts that some of the cancers can be curable, and even some of the metastatic cancers should be treated with a curative intent. So this is how the Halstead's theory looks like, but I'm not going to spend much time over here. Now, this is the background that why are we discussing this topic? Why are we discussing about a local treatment for a metastatic disease? So these are the facts. Now, 20% of the colorectal cancers have metastasis at presentation. Believe it or not, this is true. Now, 5-year survival rates of these metastatic cancers are less than 5%. Nowadays, there are new agents, targeted biologics. They have produced a gain in the overall survival and the progression-free survival. But yet, even after the systemic treatment, the predominant pattern of failure is local. And hence, the thought came to us that many oncologists that the potentially curative approach should be taken for these kinds of patients with limited metastasis. Till now, even till date, the resection of oligometastasis for metastatic colorectal cancer is the accepted form of treatment. Now, going through the patterns of metastasis, just like Dr. Dodun said, there are several, but liver and the lungs and the nodes and the bones, these are the common forms of metastasis in a colorectal or a rectal carcinoma, the liver and the pulmonary being the commonest. Now, with so many metastases, we are intrigued, we are perplexed that which metastasis, what kind of metastasis, how many types of metastasis. Shakespeare has said that what's in a name? So is there actually something in the name? Does name matter? So there is, for all students, there are not only metastasis, there are several terms: oligometastatic, induced oligometastasis, oligorecurrence, again synchronous oligometastasis, metachronous oligometastasis, and the oligoprogression. So they look all very perplexing. But the fact of the matter is that the name does matter. So there is a term called the oligometastatic disease. There is a group of disease, which is the oligometastasis, and the clinical importance of these patients is very important to understand. This group of the patient is a low disease burden, less aggressive biology, and a longer natural history, and they have an improved clinical course. So from here, the concept of local treatment came into view or came into the study. So this is probably the study which I am showing you. This is probably the first, not probably, it is actually the first randomized study ever that demonstrated that aggressive local treatment in unresectable colorectal liver metastasis does have effect. They do have increased overall survival. So in this you can see the 30-month overall survival was 38%, more than 38%. And this is after a median follow-up of long 9.7 years. So here in the two arms, the overall survival was 45.6 months in the combined modality, that is the local treatment and the systemic treatment, and 40.5 months in the systemic treatment arm. Now, we have to understand that the surgery is the accepted method of treatment. This is because there are many studies, and we do not have any studies to prove that the SBRT or other forms of ablative treatment is equal or best. Here is one retrospective study, which is very important and has been quoted by many doctors, that this is a retrospective study which compared surgery and radiotherapy, and overall survival at 2 years, they seemed to be equal in the surgery and the radiotherapy arm. And from this study onwards, the conclusion of the study was that the stereotactic radiotherapy should be included in prospective trials. And from this study and many other studies like this, we, all radiation oncologists and even surgeons, they have started believing in SBRT. But whatever we say, this you can see, this is a long flow chart, a very complicated flow chart. And this is, if you see, 2009 19, this is a consensus of several SEOM, AEC, and many you are seeing. And this, where do we see SBRT over here? In this all complicated network, SBRT comes down below. But we know that SBRT is probably as good as surgery, if not better. So this is the purpose of this talk today. Now, what is the theory behind the stereotactic ablative radiotherapy? The theory is eradication of the macroscopic tumor using the SBRT. And it is not SBRT alone. We have to control the microscopic disease with the systemic therapy. So it is an amalgamation of a local treatment, that is the SBRT, or any other ablative treatment with a systemic treatment. The systemic treatment is not going, it is for there to stay. Now, in this study, this is a SABR COMET study. This is a phase 2 randomized trial. In the SABR, the overall survival was much larger than it was initially thought. And not only so, it was much durable also. So we need not worry that whatever effect we get or the benefit we get from the SABR or SBRT is to stay for a short while. This was seen in this study. It was durable. It did show the same effects over a long period of time. Now, there are several other phase 2 trials also, like the URTC trial and other randomized trials. Now, this is also from the SABR COMET trial. This you can see the control arm and the SABR arm, the overall survival and the progression-free survival. There is a lot of difference if you see. So, for those who are not radiation oncologists or radiation oncologists who have just started in their residency, what is ablative radiation or the precision radiation or SBRT or SABR? There are several names, but all goes to prove that these are a very sophisticated method of radiation, and that is why they are compared with surgery. There is a steep isodose gradient and a steep isodose fall. There is sparing of the surrounding structures, and there is a static beam and also the VMAT with which you can plan the treatment. And what do we require? We require very good immobilization. We require very good high resolution imaging, and of course, not to forget the movement management. And how is the cell killed in SBRT? By DNA damage, anti-angiogenesis, endothelial cell apoptosis, and very interestingly, the abscopal effect. And this is what will be coming up in next maybe 5 years, 10 years. This is going to become a very important part of any cancer treatment. Now, even after saying all these things, are we going to change our protocol? Are we going to change our practice? No, because we need evidences. So for a radical treatment for oligometastatic disease, do we have evidences? Let's see. Now, SBRT for lung metastasis. So you can see the number of trials. It may be too small, but you can see the number over here. And just go to the local control, which I have marked with red. The overall survival, 83%, 100%, 43 to 76, 39 to 49 at 1 year, 2 year, and 5 years. The grade 3 toxicity. People say that the toxicity, the radiotherapy is very toxic. But no, see, the grade 3 toxicity is less than 10%. And in some series, it is less than 5%. And mind you, all these studies, the SBRT arm were not selected. They were the leftover patients. That is, these are the patients who are not fit for surgery, either medically or in whatever way. So these were the bad prognosticated patients. They were high comorbidities, advanced age, and not fit for surgery patients. But in spite of that, you can see the overall survivals. Similar was the result in SBRT for hepatic oligometastasis, SBRT for spinal oligometastasis, and everywhere the overall survival was far, far better, and even the local control rates. So, the summary of all these studies, the local control rate of SRT, that is stereotactic radiotherapy and surgery, they are comparable. We still do not have the data to say that yes, they are better. The BED of at least, this is very important, the BED has to be high. It has to be at least, different studies show different BEDs required, but this study shows the BED at least 94 gray is required for a good local control. RFA is our strongest contender. RFA is limited by the tumor size and the anatomical locations, but no such restrictions for SBRT. SBRT allows a safer dose. It is a non-invasive treatment and it achieves very high rate of local control and with minimum toxicity, if I am going to add that. But yet, there are plenty of unanswered questions. When to do it, who to do it, how do we select the patients, dose, what dose to be given, and very importantly, how to sequence, where do we place them in combination with the surgery and the chemotherapy. So all these are unanswered questions. This is one study, a very recent study in 2020. They say that some predictors of local progression and predictors of higher overall survival. So they say the predictors of local progression are low SBRT dose, lower BED, tumor location in the liver versus the pulmonary. They say that the pulmonary location is better for local progression, that is lesser of local progression than the liver. And predictors of higher overall survival are primary tumor, which is not in situ, the smaller sizes of tumor, fewer lines of previous systemic treatment, lower CEA, and of course, oligometastasis. Very surprisingly, the disease-free interval was not a predictor. It was a predictor, but it was not significant. So we still do not know. We have to understand why it was so. Another thing, as a clinician, we need to understand oligometastatic. The patient we are selecting for SBRT, is he actually a true oligometastatic disease that he merits aggressive local treatment? Or we'll have to be very careful. Is it the first radiographic manifestation of a more widespread micrometastatic disease? That is, a micrometastatic disease which is hidden under a metastatic disease which is showing up. So, now who is the right patient? Actually, we still do not know who is the right patient. And we have to understand, we have to study more, and then only we will be able to select the right patient. But basically, good performance status is a must, limited disease burden, a favorable disease biology, example, a breast or a colorectal cancer, disease-free interval more than or equal to 12 months, control of the primary tumor. A very good control of the primary tumor is very necessary to target the metastatic diseases. Small lesions, limited number of lesions, up to 3. There are some studies which say up to 5. Again, higher radiation dose has to be delivered. Now, this is a very important and very new concept about oligoprogressive disease. Now, what is oligoprogressive disease? So, in this, oligoprogressive disease is a clinical scenario where few metastases progress, whereas all other metastases are stable or are responding to systemic strategies or systemic treatment. So, this is a very common scenario these days. So, SBRT here does have a role. And how? This delays the need to change the systemic treatment. It improves the PFS and the overall survival. And very importantly, the quality of life benefit is there if we think that the next line of systemic therapy which we are going to change to is probably more toxic. So there are some more papers coming up for SBRT in oligoprogressive disease.
Another 2 minutes, please.
Yeah, this is the second last slide. So the dose escalation is very important to improve the outcome. We need to go for a higher dose. The local control rates are significantly better for a higher BED. So the conclusion, 20% of the CRCs have metastasis at presentation. Oligometastasis is a state of limited metastatic burden. SBRT to all known visible metastasis holds promise to extend the survival or even effect a cure. Higher SBRT doses are required to obtain the best local control. Lack of clear identification criteria. We do not have any identification criteria or biomarkers for properly selecting the patient. We need some assessment criteria to assess the response to the treatment. We still do not have. Very important, integration of local and systemic treatment. We need to work together. No one treatment is going to give the solution. And for all these, it necessitates randomized controlled trials. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. The more I listen to all these topics, I feel like these individual topics require more than an hour to discuss. They are so fascinating. And
you will say that after listening to them, you will feel like irradiating all the patients.
oh, no, sir. When you are there, why should I irradiate all the patients? You can take care of all them.
No, but I like it that you are taking interest.
Therapies. Thank you so much, ma'am. It was a wonderful presentation. And from now, we will move on to the next and the last part of our today's session. Panel discussion on metastatic colorectal cancer, and I invite Dr. Manish Shinghal to conduct the panel. Dr. Manish Shinghal is a senior consultant medical oncologist at Indraprastha Apollo Hospitals, Delhi. He has been an alumnus of prestigious All India Institute of Medical Sciences, from where he has done his DM Medical Oncology, and he is a very well-known face in all academic forum and academic activities in this country. Welcome, sir, and I am now handing over this session to you. Thank you for your participation.
Can you also introduce our panelists as well?
Yes, sure. So, we are having Dr. Deepak Govil. Sir is a senior consultant GI surgery and liver surgery and laparoscopic surgery at Indraprastha Apollo Hospitals, Delhi. May I request Dr. V. Srinivasan to participate? Dr. Srinivasan is a senior consultant radiation oncologist and head of the department at Mayat International Center in Chennai. Sir has also been the secretary of Indian College of Radiation Oncology, which is the academic wing of Association of Radiation Oncologists of India. May I request Dr. Shoaib Zaidi to participate? Dr. Zaidi is a senior consultant surgical oncologist at Indraprastha Apollo Hospitals, New Delhi, and sir has been trained with robotic surgery and has been a very fascinated person about metastatic disease and thoracic surgeries. I request Dr. Gagan Saini to participate. Dr. Saini is an alumnus of All India Institute of Medical Sciences, from where he has done his MD in radiation oncology and has been practicing as associate director of Max Group of Hospitals in Baisali and Patparganj. And I request Dr. Vikash Kumar to participate. Dr. Vikash Kumar is an alumnus of BHU and is working as senior consultant radiation oncologist and unit head at Asian Institute of Medical Sciences. I request Dr. Safalta Bagmar. She has been to participate. She is working as senior consultant medical oncologist at BL Kapoor Hospital, Delhi. She has also worked as a faculty in prestigious Institute of Liver and Biliary Sciences, New Delhi. She has been an alumnus of All India Institute of Medical Sciences. I request Dr. Rajit Chanana to participate. Dr. Rajit is working as a senior consultant medical oncologist at Dharamshila Narayana Super Specialty Hospital, New Delhi. Dr. Chanana is alumnus of Tata Memorial Hospital, Mumbai. And Dr. Akash Kumar Jha, please participate. Dr. Akash Kumar Jha is now working as assistant professor at National Cancer Institute, which has been the newly formed dedicated cancer institute of All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi, and it is situated in Jhajjar. I take this pleasure to also let you know that I had this pleasure of working with him for almost a year when I worked there as a faculty in the radiation oncology department. And Dr. Jha is also an alumnus of All India Institute of Medical Sciences, from where he did his DM in medical oncology. Now I request Dr. Shinghal to take over the session and start the panel discussion. Thank you so much, sir. All the esteemed panelists to be here. It's an opportunity for all of us to have you on board, and pleasure for me also. Thank you so much.
So thank you everyone, and welcome all the panelists. Uh, so generally speaking, the treatment of metastatic colorectal cancer, most of the cases is medical oncology perspective, and very rarely we think of radiation, but very commonly we do think of surgery. So we have got two very iconic surgeons on board, and we have got three radiation oncologists, and we have got three medical oncologists. So I'll start with the first case. I hope my slides are visible to everybody.
Yeah, it's visible.
So this is regarding a 51-year-old woman, and initially presented with anorexia and weight loss. She had a medical and no other medical and family history which was significant. The, the laboratory test, the biochemistry test did show that there is some liver dysfunction which is happening, and otherwise the CBC, KFT, LFT was the CBC and KFT was normal. The tumor marker, the CA, was quite much raised, and she landed up in childbirth class stage A. The CT scan showed a lesion in the transverse colon, and there were multiple masses involving segment 6, 7, and 8. And the colorectal endoscopy and biopsy showed an adenocarcinoma, and this was obstructing quite much. And she was RAS wild type and BRAF wild type. And these were the visible scans, and just for representation. So this was a bulky disease in the liver. So my first question to the medical oncologist is what proportion of your metastatic colorectal cancer patient actually undergo mutation testing, and what type of testing do you do? Dr. Safalta, you can take this question.
We do the testing for all the patient upfrontly at the baseline, and
What are the testings that you do?
we do the extended RAS mutation analysis, BRAF, HER2 mutations. These are the tests which
HER2 regularly?
we have started recently of doing it for all the patients.
What
Else,
about MSI?
MSI also.
So MSI, what method of MSI do you use?
Yes, IHC based MSI is which we are using right now. And if there is like equivocal as same as that breast cancer, we then go for the FISH.
And what is the cutoff for HER2? You said that you are doing HER2 also quite regularly now.
Yes.
What is the difference between HER2 positivity between breast cancer and between colorectal cancer? Any
Uh,
idea about that?
Yes. HER2 positivity in the breast cancer, it is like more than 10% in IHCs, but in colorectal it is higher, like 30% or so, as far as I know.
50%. So, Dr. Rajat, do you agree with this? Are you also doing everything upfront?
Hello, sir. Good evening, sir. Recently, I've started doing all the things like MSI and HER2 testing also. So,
Yeah.
4 months back, I was not doing it, but recently, I've started doing all these things.
So, have you had a word with your pathologist that the HER2 is not the same as HER2 of breast cancer, and the cutoff is actually very different?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So actually, I do it. I've never got a HER2 positive report till now. I usually discuss with my pathologist in case I decide to change my treatment based on the pathology report.
And you are doing MSI as well?
Yes, sir, by IHC.
By IHC. So, Dr. Jha, pardon me, you are a medical oncologist or radiation oncologist?
Sir, medical oncologist, sir.
Okay, Dr. Jha, thank you so much. So, what is the practice at NCI Jhajjar?
Sir, they are following the same ALRAS, RAF, and MSI. All the testing at the upfront first. At baseline, we are trying to do.
So, let me just ask you one very simple question. Why do you do BRAF? Do you never offer BRAF mutated patients the EGFR targeted therapy, or you consider them for EGFR targeted therapy plus a BRAF inhibitor?
No. Technically, yes. We do normally. Obviously, we are not doing cetuximab plus imtorafenib and that BRAF targeted therapy. We are not doing that. But definitely, BRAF sometimes help in prognosis, and if sometimes if it is oligometastatic, the resectability issues there, we can use some folfoxiri or some kind of chemo regimens that can lead to some earlier conversion to resectable status.
Okay, fair enough. So, coming to the next question, I think we can ask the surgeons over here, sir. what is the sidedness distribution in metastatic colorectal cancer in your practice? So we are not asking anything from the book. So what is your practice? Dr. Zaidi perhaps can take this question. Right-sided versus left side versus transverse colon.
Yeah, most of the patients who present with the colorectal metastasis, it depends on whether it's synchronous or metachronous. Patients with synchronous metastasis, they have a poorer outcome compared
No,
to
sir,
patients
I'm asking
who have,
about right versus left. What is the distribution? How much 50%, 60%, right versus left versus transverse colon?
offhand it will be difficult to tell you, but maybe I think maybe left-sided tumors I've seen more often with
Than the
colorectal
right-sided
metastasis.
tumors. I think that is what anybody would say. Dr. Deepak Govind, sir, what you have any idea of what is the distribution?
Yeah. Overall, I think left-sided tumors have a higher tendency to metastasize to liver, and that's what we see also. If they are
Okay.
rectal metastasis, they are more common to have liver mets as compared to a right-sided or a transverse colon.
Right. Thank you very much. I'll call later. I'm on a webinar. So would you offer surgical excision in this particular patient, sir? There are quite widespread metastases. What is your idea? Dr. Zaidi or Dr. Deepak, anybody can take this.
It doesn't look operable.
Doesn't look operable. So would you like to extend some therapy to make it operable, sir? Will you ask your medical oncologist to reduce it, and perhaps the left-sided lobe can increase in size, and then you can think of an operation?
I think this patient is having two huge tumor. I have not seen all the images of the scan because we would like to see the pedicle right side and the left side pedicles of the liver. We have not seen that, but the remnant liver, which I can see only in one picture. The segment 2 and 3 only are left in this.
And what should be the remnant liver ideally before one can think of a resection?
It should be comfortably. It should be at least 30%. At least more than 25 to 30% in a patient who has not received chemotherapy.
So, is there a specific test that can be done? So, is there a specific test that can be done to see the remnant liver? Is there any name?
Several tests have been described. Okay,
Right.
Initially we must have if facility is there, we should have a ICG retention or clearance test. And if the ICG is less than 10% at 15 minutes, then the patient is suitable for surgery. But at the same time, ICG clearance does not tell us about the future liver remnant. For that, we'll have to do volumetry. Function, yeah. Volumetry, we should calculate the total liver volume and subtract it with the tumor volume. That gives us the volumetry.
And this is generally done by radiologist.
This is done by radiologist. There are several techniques which can be combined with this. There is one technique of 99 mebrofin uptake study of the liver. The percentage FLR, future liver remnant, is multiplied by the this mebrofin technetium 99 uptake. That gives us more reliable, information in terms of functional liver volume. Normally, the volumetry gives us the anatomical volume, but if you want to know the functional liver volume, this mebrofin study gives us a functional volume. At the same time, ICG clearance, which is more popular, and if we combine FLR calculation with the ICG clearance, that also gives us a functional liver volume.
Fair enough.
A patient who has got associated cirrhosis, we must, do HVPG, hepatic venous gradient. That tells us about the degree of the portal hypertension. But this patient is the liver appears to be okay. Rest of the liver.
Yeah. Dr. Deepak, sir, would you like to add something to this, or?
I just would like, because as Dr. Zaidi has said, I think the remnant liver, we would prefer to have 25 to 30% if the liver is normal. The remnant, I think that is an important factor which has to be in consideration. If the liver is cirrhotic or it is a fatty liver, then the requirement of the percentage is almost 40% of in cases with a fatty liver. And the method used, I think volumetry is the main method which is used today to identify the percentage. And if there's any doubt about the nature of the liver, you can do a biopsy of the liver to have a clear identification of the cirrhosis.
What is generally the use of portal vein embolization? When do you use it? and how do you combine it with chemotherapy? Any idea on that?
Portal vein embolization, if we feel that it is a localized tumor, like if you have to do an extended resection and you feel that the FLR is low and probably it might, you may be able to resect if you get a good FLR, then in those situations we consider a portal vein embolization, so that there is a hypertrophy of the remnant liver, and then at a later stage, maybe after 4 to 6 weeks of that, then you can consider going back to the resection.
So how much time does it take, sir, for the liver to regenerate and grow after a portal vein embolization?
Usually it takes 2-3 weeks, but by surgery usually is done around 4 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks later.
3 to 4 weeks. Excellent, sir. Thank you so much. So this patient underwent a laparoscopic transverse colectomy due to high risk of obstruction, and the histopathological examination showed that there were 13 nodes which were isolated and they were all positive. It was a moderately differentiated adenocarcinoma. So what treatment would you offer after surgery of the primary tumor? Again, back to the medical oncologist. Is it excision of the liver mets, which the surgeons have ruled out? So what chemotherapy do you use? Dr. Rajat?
Sir, I would be using chemotherapy in this patient, and I forget it, whether it was a right side or
it was a transverse
left
colon.
Since it's a wild type tumor, and we are probably planning a reverse stage surgery.
It was all RAS wild type, BRAF wild type, MSI HER2 not done.
So I would be using chemotherapy, and I would be tempted to use bevacizumab.
You'll be tempted to use bevacizumab. Why so?
Because there is negative data for using cetuximab as neoadjuvant therapy in EPOC trial. So even if it is wild type, there is some data that bevacizumab may add to the response rate.
So you
that
consider
is why
transverse colon on left side or right side?
I don't know.
So back to Dr. Zaidi sir, whether we should take transverse colon as right side or left side, and or the first 2/3 is left side and the last 1/3 is on the right side or left side, whatever.
You know, the first 2/3 is the right side, whereas from the first 2/3 to the splenic flexure, it is not defined.
It is not.
The left-sided cancers are considered from the splenic flexure downwards up to the rectum, but the second half of the transverse colon, it is not defined whether it will come in the right side or the left side, as per the literature.
So let's consider it just proximal to the splenic flexure. So Dr. Safalta, what do you do?
So whether it is right side or left side, we can use bevacizumab. Okay.
Right.
So there is no point of discussion. So actually the thing is, as studies have already shown that in the right-sided tumor, you should prefer a bevacizumab. Left-sided tumor, you can use either of the two. So if you use blanket bevacizumab first line, that is fine enough for. So in the transverse colon, whether it is right side or left side, you'll be using bevacizumab.
So what about the FIRE3 data which showed that the overall response rates were same, but the overall survival was in favor of EGFR first, followed by bevacizumab?
Then there are multiple critics for this trial. So ultimately, the CALGB study came out to be the winner. And
if you look at the CLGB, overall survival data set and the survival curves, and you will find that the overall survival was in favor of cetuximab first, followed by bevacizumab. Akash, do you agree with that?
Sir, as far as transverse colon is concerned, I would still go for chemotherapy plus bevacizumab.
Right.
Just because
what if it was on the splenic flexure?
Had it been splenic flexure, then there is a clear defined sidedness that is left side. Then I would go with cetuximab. Otherwise, this transverse colon is in between those. And in CALGB, if you add transverse colon data on either side, it does not make a difference. So basically, we don't know exactly will it work or not, but bevacizumab will definitely work. So what is certain, I would go with that.
Okay. Had it been clear-cut left-sided tumor then?
Yeah, then I would have gone for cetuximab.
Sir, may I add, sir, there is some
Yeah,
data in EPOC trial that in neoadjuvant setting, cetuximab has given inferior results. So if you are planning to go for a curative intent, then I'm not sure to add cetuximab.
Yeah, because they gave cetuximab even in the adjuvant setting as well. and many
Yes.
patients received K-pox.
Yes.
And cetuximab is not to be combined with K-pox. So what is the preferred chemotherapy regime? Folfox, Folfiri, what do you use routinely? Safalta?
I combine Folfox usually with
Usually
bevacizumab.
Folfox.
Yeah.
So this patient received Folfox and bevacizumab, as is the common consensus, it being considered as a right-sided tumor, and you don't like to use an EGFR targeted therapy in a right-sided tumor. And liver masses were considered to be unresectable, and metastasis and the residual liver function was below 30%. So left-sided, I think we have already discussed this. Left-sided, perhaps people would like to use cetuximab first, followed by bevacizumab later on. And right-sided, I think we have already discussed that it is bevacizumab. So what if this patient had a resectable liver metastasis? Dr. Jha?
Sir, resectable metastasis, I would go for chemotherapy plus bevacizumab again.
You have to stop bevacizumab at least 2 cycles before.
Yeah,
And
6 weeks.
cetuximab you can give up till the last cycle.
That is true, but bevacizumab is still tempting in transverse colon, I would say, because we don't know exactly what is the origin of transverse colon. It is 2/3 or 1/3. Most of the cases we are not very sure exactly. So biology is different. All sorts of mutations have been different in the origin of.
But I just
colon.
looked at the ISMO guidelines. They say that in case you want to really downstage the disease, it is even fine to use cetuximab upfront if your aim is to downsize the disease, and you can use it even in a right-sided tumor.
So,
What can you explain what tempts ISMO to use cetuximab even in right-sided tumors?
So the response rates have been similar. Maybe I'm not sure. Yeah.
So perhaps
sure
the depth of response.
Because
So the theory of depth of response and is there with the cetuximab. So do you go with that theory of depth of response and the rapidity of response?
Yeah, there is data of higher rapidity and conversion is better with cetuximab. But yeah, actually, sir, frankly speaking, we have not been using cetuximab that much, probably not that much of experience we have. So
Perhaps cost
maybe.
effectiveness.
Yeah, that is a big factor.
So let me come back to the radiation oncologist now. So in case the lesions decrease quite drastically, so would you consider stereotactic radiation in a patient like this? Dr.
Yeah.
Srinivas,
Yeah.
you can take this question. Okay.
Gagan, okay, right. Even if the lesion regresses, I don't think we can consider, because again depends on the normal liver. So we should again have, like surgeons, we should have at least 750 ml of normal liver.
So what is your cutoff for giving SBRT to the liver? How much percentage of normal liver is required?
750 ml of normal liver.
70 ml.
750, yeah, 750 cc. We quantify that in cc, so at least 750 cc of normal liver should be there.
Or in percentages, as surgeons explain, more than 30% normal liver. In percentages,
Comes around at least 40%.
Comes around 40%. So you require more normal liver than the surgeon.
Correct. Yeah.
Is that true, Dr. Gagan? You agree with that?
Gagan?
Hi. So surgeons, while they do define it in terms of percentages, but radiation oncologists must do it in a much more methodical manner in terms of CCs, because ultimately, we really cannot, once we have caused the liver damage, then really nothing can be reversed after that. So that's just a first comment. Your question, I guess, is that would you be doing SBRT if this, suppose you do all this biological therapy plus chemotherapy and it regresses? So would I consider it for SBRT? Only if the surgeons are not considering it for surgery. That is my
not as a preferred therapy.
So the child is also agreeing with me.
Then I will be the best.
Right. So not as a preferred therapy.
Yeah, agree. Yeah, not a preferred.
So where do you consider is the role of radiation as such in a metastatic colorectal cancer patient? So when is the last patient of metastatic colorectal cancer patient when you use radiotherapy? Dr. Srinivasan.
Yes, I have done for metastatic patients. Like say, if there's only 2 or 3 liver, like the tumor size is around 2.5 centimeter, and it's defined, and I could have a more than 750 cc of normal liver, then I definitely give.
I'm asking how frequently you do it in practice. Actually, in practice.
How frequently? If you ask me, maybe I'll tell you one patient every 3 months. Yeah.
One patient every 3 months. And these are the patients who have been rejected by a surgeon, or they are not good surgical candidates.
Yes, I agree. And all patients not willing for surgery again.
Or patient not willing for surgery. Is that the case with Dr. Gagan too?
Dr. Manish, just to take a little bit of your perspective into the previous question Dr. Srinivas was answering. So, for example, you have a colorectal cancer patient who's metastatic, say with lung and all that, and you are doing palliative chemotherapy for that patient, and you are having a very good response. And over a course of time, there is an oligoprogression in liver. I guess those are the kind of cases where you would probably go in for SBRT. Those are not really the kind of cases where surgery will be needed. So I guess that is one answer. But if we are going in a manner where the patient is having the classical colorectal liver metastasis, then because of the evidence, because it's been around since 1907, perhaps surgery rules the roost, because what we have is quite retrospective in nature.
Right. So, Dr. Vikas, is there an ideal size of the liver lesion where radiation can work?
So it's basically the best size is around 3 centimeter, and number up to 3 number are best suitable for SBRT treatment. And functional liver volume, as Dr. Srinivasan said, we need 700 cc minimum of functional liver.
Any other precaution that you take that it should not be close to a vessel, or like in RFA we say there shouldn't be close to a big vessel or anything? Any other limitation of radiation that you foresee in giving radiation to the liver?
Not exactly, but I would like to say the hollow viscous, like inferior lobe or near, like caudate lobe or so. This tumor which are in close proximity to hollow viscous close tumors are not a good to select.
If I can answer, if it's close to duodenum, so that would be high, or if close to the chest wall, then there's a chance of a rib fracture. So even during those times, instead we will fractionate the doses. Instead of giving very high dose, you can fractionate and give it over 4 or 5 fractions. So in that way, you can prevent that.
Yes.
So it's not a contraindication. It's just that we need to be more careful. That's what.
It's a relative.
So, Dr. Gagan, you mentioned about oligoprogression and radiation. Do you ever had seen any abscopal effect of radiation which is described with SBRT?
No, I haven't seen it in my practice. I'm just waiting for it. So that I can show it in a conference, yeah.
So, Dr. Rajat, have you ever used radiation for an abscopal effect?
No, sir.
But
oligoprogressing disease, abscopal effect?
Not in colon, maybe in lung.
Yeah, maybe in lung.
Maybe in renal cell carcinoma, melanoma, but liver and lung is
abscopal effect
never
is
heard
irrespective of the type of tumor, in case you believe in the abscopal effect. Dr. Jha?
Sir.
You are working in NCI. You
Sir.
should be running a trial on it. So I remember
just
there was a Lancet Oncology paper. There was a Lancet Oncology paper by Golden et al. And that was way back in 2016-17. It was a Lancet Oncology paper, and he did a very nice concept. So patients who were progressing on their systemic therapy and had more than 5 lesions, he gave SBRT to just one of the lesion, and the patients continued the same systemic therapy on which they were progressing. And you know what was the response rate in these patients? It was 23%. You don't get 23% response rate on continuing the same chemotherapy on which the patient is progressing by just giving high dose ablative radiation to just one of the spots in a metastatic setting. And these were all cancer types. So I think that this is one concept which should be practiced, and at least it should be put to test again.
So have you seen any of this kind of case?
Yeah, I've not done any study, but I'm just trying to
Just one case, single case.
prompt
not
Jha
a
to
study.
do such a study. Maybe in
Sir.
NCI Jhajjar he can definitely do it because they
Sir,
have nth number
that-
of patients coming there.
Dr. Manish,
With
if I
that
can make
respect,
a
I would
comment.
like to add one thing. Just today, interestingly, we have taken one case with a very similar scenario. The patient has a very large primary mass along with two lesions in liver. The left lobe, a large lesion that is basically hanging over the stomach, and the fat planes are lost, and another in segment 6. So just we got into that, and after discussion in MDT, we have found out that can we go for a surgical resection of one lesion and SBRT of the other.
Yeah.
So I would like to know if that is, sir.
Even in
Dr.
an
Manish, if
intraoperative
I can-
RFA can be.
Dr. Manish,
Yeah,
if I
that
can,
is. So if, I would like to know if the experience of a combination of local ablation, either RFA or whatever SBRT and plus surgery.
yeah, Dr. Akash,
Sir.
Dr. Akash Jha,
Sir.
this has been done in brain for a very long period of time, where
Sir,
metastasis,
I know.
one is resected and couple are, you give stereotactic radiosurgery. And regarding liver, I mean, why not? I mean, if there is nothing else to do, herein lies a comment, Dr. Manish, that if you are having 2 liver metastases or 5 liver metastases, and if all of them are SBRT able with 700 cc of normal liver, and all those criteria are met, then we would rather go for that 85% response rate in liver metastasis than 23%. But having said that, if that is not going to work, like the kind that you were just showing, and there is no surgery.
I was asking of oligoprogression. Perhaps you can still excite a response to the continuing systemic therapy.
Yeah, but wouldn't be better if we get an 85% response with all of them? This is just a point. But yes, if we cannot do for all, your point is very well taken. That at least we should do for one, because it will help in the systemic therapy.
Right. So that is of course it's hypothesis generating. That study was a hypothesis generating. It was not taken forward, so I didn't see any more papers coming on that. But this is perhaps something which excites me. And there are so many times that we run out of systemic therapy options, and perhaps this is one therapy which can increase response rates and survival also. One sort of maneuver. So my last question. I think this is all theory, and we'll just skip. So once the patient progresses on the systemic therapy, what's your choice of next systemic therapy? Between the two monoclonal antibodies versus continuation of bevacizumab versus cetuximab. So back to Rajat.
So in this patient, since it's wild type, then I would prefer in second line chemotherapy with cetuximab.
So you are not taker of bevacizumab continuation.
So if this patient was a KRAS mutant patient, then maybe I would have considered bevacizumab or ramucirumab. I would have taken to ramucirumab. But since it's a wild type patient, I would like to switch to cetuximab.
Okay,
in
great.
second line.
So Safalta, your comment? Cetuximab versus bevacizumab in a
Because in a TML study, it was like changing the backbone of the chemotherapy and continuing the same bevacizumab that has shown a survival benefit. So it is like I'll be continuing bevacizumab, giving another chance to it with when I have used Folfox, I'll be using Folfree, and after that also the patient progresses, then I'll be thinking of using cetuximab or panitumumab.
cetuximab as a single agent or with irinotecan?
With irinotecan.
So you will
Probably,
continue on progression.
Can be likely,
Yeah,
or
the bond study, according to the bond trial. So any comment from Dr. Jha?
Sir, maybe I would go ahead with cetuximab, and the bevacizumab continuation is the second option. If there is a mutation or the patient cannot afford.
So this is just one study called as a Unicancer Prodigy 18 trial. It was a smaller phase 2 study where they compared bevacizumab versus cetuximab plus chemotherapy after first progression. And all these patients received bevacizumab. And what you see over here is even in the wild type KRAS mutated, and overall survival was in favor of continuing bevacizumab, then getting cetuximab in the second line. So this was on continuation of bevacizumab versus changing the monoclonal antibody to cetuximab. So here also bevacizumab was the winner arm. Perhaps cetuximab does not work so well in the second line. So whenever I think cetuximab is indicated, very clearly it should be cetuximab first, followed by bevacizumab, because there are definite indications coming from CLGB 80405, as also the FIRE3, that the overall survival is in favor. And keeping cetuximab for a later use perhaps decreases the efficacy of the drug as compared to bevacizumab. So cetuximab followed by bevacizumab may be the preferred sequence of therapy, and there is definite some hints coming from CLGB 80405 as well as FIRE3 in terms of overall survival. If you look at the overall survival curves of 80405, and this was in the supplementary section of 80405, where they showed that those patients who are on FOLFOX, they had a better overall survival with cetuximab first, followed by bevacizumab. But you'll have to go to the supplementary section of 80405, where, because FOLFOX is generally the commonly used chemotherapy partner, and if you go to the supplementary section, there was a definite statistically significant overall survival benefit with cetuximab first, followed by bevacizumab, of course, for the left-sided tumors. But that is just thought-provoking, because this was not the primary endpoint of the study. Such subset analysis, this is hypothesis generating. I think this we have covered everything, and we are running short of time also. Any final comment from any panelist?
Anybody who is doing using folfoxary?
Very rarely. Very, very fitter patients. Yeah, so one can do that. Tribe data.
If this patient would have been a younger patient, 30, 35 years old, probably we might have thought of making the
one can
using folfoxary to make the liver lesion resectable
in a phase 3 study. Yes.
Yeah.
So with that, I'll thank you and over to the organizers.
Thank you so much, sir. And as usual, it's a wonderful discussion and rocking something from you. Just to add to this metastatic horizon, most of the time we discuss about liver and lung mets, forgetting about the fascinating result of treating with SBRT in case of bone mets. And just to share, we have a double primary patient having hepatic flexor colon cancer along with intrahepatic cholangio cancer with lung and bone mets. That patient is getting FOLFIRINOX along with bevacizumab and showing good response so far. So maybe that can answer to Dr. Sapalta's question. Thank you all, and thank you for joining in.
Thank you, Total. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all the participants. Thank you.